This is a concept I believe in so strongly, and it is vital to the work that I do every day, which is why I'm so excited to be here with all of you, so many Virginians from such diverse backgrounds, but all who care so deeply about America's role in the world and its impact on our great Commonwealth. I'm thrilled that the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is driving home the importance of U.S. leadership on the global stage, and that they have brought that conversation right here to Richmond. My name is Stephanie Agee. I'm with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, where I serve as the Senior Vice President for International Trade and Chief Administrative Officer. I am also a proud member of USGLC's Virginia Advisory Council. I believe passionately in the mission of this organization to promote American leadership across multiple spectrums: military, diplomatic, economic. And I'm excited to dive more into each of those topics in this afternoon's program. My job is to help Virginia companies compete and win in the global marketplace. VEDP actually has a nation-leading set of resources designed to assist companies of all shapes and sizes and in all sectors to win international sales, to improve their international success. And in turn, that is meant to grow Virginia's economy, to make it more resilient, to employ and support jobs for more Virginians, and to grow our tax base at the end of the day. And we can do a lot from our vantage point. We can help companies figure out where in the world they should sell to, help them find customers in those countries, help them figure out the rules and regulations that are required to sell their product legally into various markets. But at the state level, we don't make the rules that govern international trade and can determine a U.S. or Virginia company's ability to compete successfully against their foreign counterparts. That happens at the national and the international level. And we, and the companies that we call our customers, need strong U.S. leadership on international trade policy to set and enforce rules and establish agreements that will result in fair competition and new opportunities for our businesses. The way that America has been leading on global trade governance for more than 80 years. So in my daily life, in my work, I spend more time in the economic arena. But American diplomatic and military leadership is vitally important to creating and maintaining a stable economic environment for businesses to operate and thrive in. In addition, U.S. military leadership is incredibly important to Virginia. Over 11% of our GDP is generated by the defense sector, a larger percentage than any other state in America. And we at VEDP, we see the benefits, the positive impact of U.S. diplomatic and economic leadership when we take hundreds of Virginia companies on trade missions and to international trade shows around the world each year. We see that impact in the opportunities that these companies have as a result of that diplomatic and economic work. Again, when America leads, Virginia wins. America wins, and the world wins. I think we can all agree that over the last several years, it's been proven to us just how interconnected our prosperity and our security is, not just to each other, but also to the rest of the world. The good news is the topics we'll discuss today are where we can come together from across the region, across the political spectrum, and from so many different vantage points to work towards solutions that will benefit all of us. These are not Democratic or Republican issues. These are issues that impact all Americans. These are issues that are worth talking about with your family over the kitchen table, with your employees and your colleagues around the cafeteria, with friends over coffee or a drink. This community right here is special. Here in this room with us are leaders from all over Virginia, from big cities to small towns, urban to rural. We are leaders of the business, humanitarian, and faith communities. We are public servants, and we are military veterans. And from these diverse backgrounds, we are coming together to find common ground about how America shows up in the world. I'm excited to dive into this conversation and to hear from all of our distinguished speakers and from all of you. We'll be covering a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, so I hope that you all are ready for a dynamic and engaging dialogue. It is now my honor to welcome to the stage here in Richmond, USGLC's President and CEO, Liz Schreyer.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Stephanie. You are a fabulous partner to kick us off. I remember when we kicked off USGLC's effort in Virginia with Senator Kaine. General Mattis had just stepped down from his first public service, and I'm thrilled to be back in Virginia again. I want to welcome all of those both here and online across Virginia. A big thank you to Coca-Cola, who is our chair of our South Initiative, and on the screen is all of our partners who helped make today possible. I know there's going to be a formal introduction in just a moment, but I have to give a big shout out to a friend of USGLC, Senator Mark Warner, who is a trusted voice on national security, a dear friend of USGLC's, and your judgment, your voice is so trusted in Washington to make the world a better place every single day, and welcome to you. Now, I have to tell you, Senator Warner and I have known each other since our 20s, when Senator Warner, then I called him Mark, and I traveled overseas to a group that I helped organize, and I was going to put a picture up of that trip. You looked exactly the same, but I was having a really bad hair day, so I did not put it on. But I do have to say that from that trip on, you already were showing signs of this voice, and so there's no wonder and no surprise that you are so well respected when it comes to the issues we're going to talk about today. Now, for those of you that don't know much about and are new to the USGLC story, new to USGLC, I want to share just a quick story. As Stephanie just said, you know, the world, as I would call it, is at an inflection point. We're going to talk about, I know the senator's going to talk about it, the growing global challenges that we face. Our adversaries, our competitors are out there to play to win. We watch China and Russia and Iran every day stirring chaos and disruptions around the world at a time when we're watching 300 million people around the world that need humanitarian needs. And the question we're going to ask today is how and why, America and how America needs to show up in the world. And what I see in my travels is that there's a conversation going on about should America show up? And there's some people who think we should go inward. So the story I want to tell is I remember early on in my career of seeing members of Congress that literally went to the House floor and bragged that they didn't own a passport. And I remember, I studied history in college, that's a very dangerous thing to happen. So USGLC was born at that time to push back and to tell the story of why it's so important for America to be engaged in the world. And early on in the years that we started, I started traveling. And I remember meeting a Marine from Virginia, a young Marine who had just come back from Iraq. And he shared a story. And the story that he shared is his job was to go village by village in Iraq and to meet with them to say, what do you need? And he told me the story about he met with one of the elders in a village. Senator Warner probably has done this over his years. And you sit with the village elder and you have some tea. And he was having his tea and he says to the elder, I got a lot of stuff in my convoy. What do you need? And he went through all the ammunition he had. And the elder looked at him, to put his hand on his beard and says, what I really need is 2 goats. And he said, it's really 2 mating goats. And this Marine says to me, I immediately understood that as all the training I had in the military, what they really needed was something I didn't have. That I needed my partners at State Department, at USAID, and throughout the development and diplomacy community. And I needed what General Mattis often said, that if we don't fund the State Department, then I will need more ammunition. And that is the story of USGLC. That is the heart of our conversation today, of how America shows up, what tools that we need, and how we complement the tools of the military with development and diplomacy. The USGLC, Washington Post, once called us the Strange Bedfellow Coalition, and I'm very proud to be strange. What's strange is that we bring, as Stephanie said, lots of people together, businesses and veterans and farmers and mayors and faith leaders, and we bring them together about this common thread. We're going to talk about why and how America needs to be engaged in the world. And when it comes to engagement in the world, this need to invest in all these development and diplomacy needs, to invest in what the federal budget calls the international affairs budget, which is 1% of the whole budget. Programs that prevent conflict, programs that fight global hunger, programs that are about economic security. So as I said, I travel still around the country, and like today, we have hundreds of town hall meetings around the country. Lots of your colleagues, Senator John Thune. I was in South Dakota recently, and Indiana with Senator Todd Young, and Delaware with Senator Coons, and the list goes on. And each time we go, we ask one question: what's it worth? What's it worth for America to be engaged in the world, to invest in that little 1%? And I imagine we'll hear this today, but I hear these powerful, compelling answers, like veterans that tell me what's it worth? It's worth to them to keep our troops out of harm's way. Business leaders tell me that 1% is not charity. That 1%, as Stephanie said, is about making sure we have markets for our own goods and services. It's about creating jobs. Our faith leaders say it's about projecting who we are as Americans in terms of our values. And I'll tell you, over and over again, I keep hearing, especially the last couple of years, I keep hearing it's about global stability to keep the prices of gas and our grocery prices down in terms of how it affects us here at home. Now, I know, as Stephanie just said, you in Virginia get it. Stephanie has done an amazing job. You have over 1 million, 20% of your jobs here are trade related. You have $22 billion of exports here in Virginia. Your elected officials certainly get it. So it is your story about the power of Virginia in the world that we want to bring out and talk about tonight. And I'm so excited to be part of this conversation, especially with our Virginia Advisory Committee that is here. Some of them can't be here tonight, but a lot of you are here. And can I just invite you to just stand up, the people that are standing with us and part of us, so I can say thank you to all of you if you're part of our USGLC Virginia Advisory Committee. Thank you. So let's get started with our conversation. To introduce our guest of honor, two wonderful friends of ours, the former Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs for Virginia, Colonel Carlos Hopkins, and Coca-Cola's Director of Public Policy, Christian Ravnscroft. Did I get that right? Not quite. But thank you both.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Liz, for that introduction, and thank you, Senator Warner, for being here this afternoon as well. I remember the first time I met Senator Warner was about 23 years ago when he was beginning his campaign for governor, and been fortunate to call him a friend for these past 23 years, so thank you for your service to our Commonwealth and nation as well. My name is Carlos Hopkins, and I am the former Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs, having served under Governors Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam. And also a retired colonel in our U.S. Army. And in the role of secretary, I had the great honor to work with so many of our military leaders across the Commonwealth. And as a colonel with 32 years of service, I had the opportunity and the experience to work with so many of the members of our Department of Defense, USAID, State Department, and non-governmental organizations around the world. And one of the things that I learned is the incredible importance of the relationship between our military and our civilian counterparts. Because our deployments get a lot shorter when the resources are there to support our military. And so I'm glad, Liz, that you had that quote from General Mattis up there. As you've already heard, the stakes for the U.S. global leadership are increasing and incredibly high. The number of incredible conflicts going on around the world. We know the obvious, the Ukraine. We know in Afghanistan. During my time in the Middle East, we knew what was going on in Lebanon. We knew what was occurring in Syria. There are people being displaced around the world. And it's important for organizations like USGLC to advocate for the resources to support those folks who find themselves displaced as a result of these conflicts. But as we lead globally, we understand how important that global leadership is to us here locally in Virginia. And leading globally matters locally, particularly when we think about our economy here in the Commonwealth. And as you've heard, that 20% of our jobs are based on trade. 95% of the customers in the world live outside of the United States. And so it's important that we have those relationships outside of our own nation. The leaders of our businesses here in Virginia understand that important connection. And they understand that private sector, they cannot do it alone. And so it's important that we establish a connection with that global marketplace. It's why we need these vital strategic investments in diplomacy and in development to help fight corruption, promote the rule of law, and open new markets for our goods and services, which will be key to the economic prosperity and national security for us here at home. So to be clear, and let me be blunt, those strategic investments are good for the world, and they're good for American business and our national security. So I want to turn to someone now who understands that quite well, Mr. Christian Rautenstrauch, Director of Public Policy for Coca-Cola.
Thank you, Colonel Hopkins. My name is Christian Rautenstrauch, Director of Public Policy at Coca-Cola. I'd like to apologize to both of you for having to get that name to pronounce. It's probably the hardest one in the room. Jim McGreevy, who leads our public policy and government relations team, is sorry he could not attend this afternoon, but I'm thrilled he gave me the opportunity to fill in. One of the coolest things about our brand is that Coca-Cola is just as recognizable at a corner store in Richmond as it is in Sao Paulo or Sydney, Australia. Our journey from a small pharmacy in Atlanta to refreshing people around the world is a testament to the positive influence of American culture across the globe. As USGLC's South Initiative Chair, Coca-Cola knows that America's global leadership is critical, not only for our economic prosperity and security, but also to showcase the very best of American values. And nobody understands and champions that more than our featured speaker, Virginia Senator Mark Warner. After a few remarks from Senator Warner, Liz Schreier will join us back on stage to moderate an engaging discussion. Joining that discussion is Brett Vassy, the 6th President and CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association, representing Virginia's estimated 6,000 manufacturing facilities, employing over 230,000 Virginians. Vassy has served on numerous federal, state, and business boards and councils, and is also a founder, president, and CEO of the Virginia Industry Foundation and the Virginia Craft Brewers Guild. Lieutenant General Scott Kinsvater of the U.S. Air Force. General Kinsvater is a command pilot with more than 3,600 hours of flight time, more than 600 combat hours over Iraq and Afghanistan, over 10 deployments. He most recently served as the 22nd Deputy Chairman of the NATO Military Committee, where he was principal advisor to the NATO's Secretary General and senior military spokesman of the 30-Nation Alliance. General Kinsvater also advised the Deputy Secretary General, led coordination of nuclear, biological, and chemical matters, and in the chairman's absence, directed daily operations and the business of the Military Committee, NATO's highest military authority. And though he needs no introduction, it is now my honor to introduce a valued friend of the Coca-Cola Company, Senator Mark Warner, who has represented Virginia in the U.S. Senate since 2008. As chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Senator Warner knows all too well the scope and severity of crises around the world that threaten global stability and American lives and livelihood. It is why he has been such a longtime champion for America's global engagement and understands the importance of investing in our full set of national security tools: development, diplomacy, and defense. Before his time in Congress, Senator Warner served as the governor of Virginia from 2002 to 2006, fighting every step of the way for Virginians and Americans across the country. And I'm not sure where it ranks on his list of accomplishments, but what I remember most from his governor days is when he brought Virginia Tech into the ACC. It's my honor to welcome to the stage Senator Mark Warner.
Well, Christian, thank you for that introduction. And one of the times when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm no longer the you guy, when I would go around at Virginia Tech, remember one day, the first day of classes, and go up to these young kids and say, "Do you know who I am?" And they would say, "No." And then I'd say, "I was the guy that got the Hokies into the ACC." And a lot of them said, "What's the ACC anymore?" So, Carlos, it is great to see you, but it's not been 23 years. It's more like 25 or 26. So, getting old, man. Stephanie, let me tell you, let me give you one good piece of Virginia news right at the top. Traffic from D.C. to Richmond was back to pre-COVID levels. And I got to tell you, and Brett, you will remember this, when I was governor, there was a lot less traffic. I also want to give a shout out there. I've got so many friends in this audience I will use up. And by the way, do not think, with apologies to everyone, that I'm going to abide by my 7 or 10 minutes. I got a couple of things I'm going to say here. And as a senator, Liz, you know, a senior senator, I do want to acknowledge, though, Bill Leidy. Together, I'm very proud of the fact when I was governor, our Commonwealth got named best managed state in the country, got named best state for business, got named best state in the country to receive a public education, preschool through graduate school, all bipartisan, independent. And a lot of that, he would probably not believe I'd actually say this to him now because I beat the crap out of him every day. But Bill is my chief of staff, and it is great to see you, and I know you're involved with this organization. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Bill. And let me say to Liz, where Liz, you know, there is such a great backstory. I thought she was going to tell the story where we went with a group of, at that point, very young people. Liz was working with AIPAC, and we went on one of her trips to Israel, and it was kind of democratic young political operatives, so to speak. And I just managed a year or so before Doug Wilder's campaign for governor, and the factor of all the people in that group, there were 2 governors, there was a national security advisor, there were senior political, it was quite a group. And thank you for what was then my first of maybe now 6 or 7 trips to Israel and the Middle East, and I'm going to touch on that briefly in my comments. What I thought I'd do, because I want to kind of give you a view as fellow Virginians and kind of role of the Intel Committee, I want to take you on a journey that's a little bit different than maybe what was advertised. And I know when we get the panel going, we'll get into more of the substance of you know, how all of this affects Virginia. Let me knock out a couple of things just at the top end before I take you on this global tour of 6 spots that I'm thinking about almost on a daily basis that may or may not be on your initial list of, oh my gosh, that's where all the time and attention is focused. But to get a couple of things out of the way before I take you on that tour, just to settle groundwork, let me be clear. It absolutely is important who wins the war in Ukraine. It is absolutely in America's national interest that we support Ukraine, that we push back Putin's aggression. And one of the things that before we got this last tranche of aid, the Ukrainians, and I don't think we did a crummy job on promoting this, the Ukrainians with, yes, support from America, but also equal, if not greater support when you add the economic aid from European nations, literally took out 87% of Russia's pre-existing ground forces, 63% of their pre-existing tank corps, 32% of their armored personnel carriers without the loss of a single American soldier or single NATO soldier. And failure to understand that, and that democracies around the world look to us, is the antithesis of what this organization and what the overwhelming majority of Congress, when the second tranche of Ukraine aid came up, over 80% Democrats, Republicans alike supported it. And some try to pretend otherwise, but that is not the overwhelming bipartisan sentiment of the Congress, and it is absolutely not, as the general knows, the sense of everyone in the military world. Liz also mentioned, as we came in, she got to know, and I got to know, a family who at one point back, I think when I was governor, actually lived in Richmond, and John and Rachel Poland, and their incredible son Hirsch, who I never had the opportunity to meet, but who was one of the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th. And this the young man who was at the music festival, and literally when John and Rachel, I don't think I've ever met a couple, particularly Rachel, who has been so strong. Their last image of their son was him being thrown in the back of a Toyota truck with his arm severed from a RPG blast that went into the shelter where he and his friends were frankly trying to stay away from the Hamas terrorists. He unfortunately was one of the 6 hostages that were killed recently by Hamas, and it is a huge tragedy. And Israel clearly has a right to defend itself. We need to end also the suffering of the 40,000 plus Palestinians that have been killed. And I can't think of any. We were talking a little bit. I work very closely with somebody that may not again be at the top of everybody's list in the news, but I think is one of the most significant and most respected people of the whole Biden administration, and that is Bill Burns, who is the CIA director. And Liz and I were talking, there was no one that was more engaged and has given more heart and soul, and we have been so close a few times on getting to that release of the hostages and a ceasefire, and maybe in the questions we can get more into that. But I want to take you on this kind of tour of 6 items around the world that, again, may be not at the top of your list, that I think are critically important to America and its ongoing leadership, critically important as we think about Virginia's economy and future economy. Number 1, so let's just go, we'll kind of go east to west, and this is slightly west of us. But the first place that is not on high enough radar screen of, I think, most Americans, but is critically important, is Venezuela. We have seen an authoritarian regime in Venezuela, started by Chavista, now succeeded by Maduro. Venezuela, 25 years ago, was far and away the wealthiest country per capita in South America. Has oil reserves that are still, depending on how you cut it, 1, 2, or 3 in the world. For past 10 or 15 years, that regime has basically cut back dramatically on Venezuela's economy. We've seen a mass migration. 8 million of Venezuelans' population has left their country. Many, a few years back, would settle in Florida. More recently, though, particularly in the last 2 years, upwards of 40% of folks, when the border was too open, and I'm glad to see the border has been more shut down, were Venezuelans. And what we did with the Maduro regime was a number of months back, we said, we will take back some of the sanctions, but you got to allow a free election. And the interesting thing is, Maduro did allow a relatively free election. And the thing that was stunning, and why we've got to stay focused on this, is the Venezuelan people voted in record numbers. And even in those poorest parts of Venezuela, the barrios that had historically supported Chavez, they came out in overwhelming numbers. And the remarkable thing, and again, this is something we ought to learn in America, Venezuela has one of the best electoral systems of making sure after the fact that you can't cheat. With an accounting and a system that is, frankly, we could learn from. In the aftermath of that election, the Maduro government that night, a month or so ago, 2 months ago, said Maduro had won. The truth was, based upon every outside observer and at each of these polling stations, 25,000 roughly across the country, they had, the opposition and the regime were there, and they each got a little ticker at the end that said kind of vote totals. The actual vote facts were about 67% of the Venezuelans who voted for the opposition. And it is critically important in a nation, I was an exchange student in Argentina, I've always been focused on South America, that we stand up for democracy, that we push Maduro in every way possible. And, which country is center left versus center right keeps switching in South America. Colombia used to be one of the center right, now it's center left. The opposite was true in Argentina. But it is terribly important for us to demonstrate to South Americans and the world that we will stand for democracy. It is critically important if we don't want to have, if Maduro is inaugurated in January, another 4 to 5 million Venezuelans leave their country and vote with their feet and potentially overwhelm our border. We need to bring democracy to to Venezuela. I believe we need to reinstate the sanctions. I believe what the administration has done so far in terms of trying to get Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia to push Maduro out isn't working. We need a more engaged contact group. So for democracy, for our own border, for actually energy resources, it is terribly important that we don't lose sight of Venezuela, number one. Let's go a little bit further west. Australia and Oceania. Australia, I think we probably might be on, not first tier on our list, but might be second tier. Australia with the AUKUS Accord and the Quad, and the AUKUS Accord, everybody in Virginia knows there is probably no state in the country that will benefit more from AUKUS in terms of our combined efforts around submarines than Virginia. What people don't maybe recognize, and candidly until the last couple of years I didn't fully appreciate, is the biggest competition right now as we think about U.S.-China that is not being recognized is the race to see who will bring influence to the dozen-plus countries ranging from Papua New Guinea to a whole series of islands that most of us probably didn't even realize were countries. People have heard of Fiji, and people have heard of some of the French provinces, but Vanuatu and Tortu and Solomon Islands and the Marshall Islands. And why this is important is of these dozen-plus island nations that all have mineral rights and ocean rights, in some cases that are the size of, from Virginia through Pennsylvania combined, and that may be a nation state that only has 100,000 people but controls a lot of water. Half those nation states we don't even have embassies in. Australia, thank goodness, does, and if we tighten that relationship, that is important. China is in every one of these nations. We are now trying to change that in terms of partnering with some of our tech companies, and our ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy, is doing a great job. If we can bring broadband, if we can just bring cable connections, it's extraordinarily important. And the undersea minerals, as we think about rare earth minerals, and the competition we have with China in that domain, there is more potential to unlock for the equivalent of pennies on the dollars. A little tiny bit of diplomatic and other assistance to these nations. They want to align with us, but if we ignore them or not even have an embassy or any kind of presence, we will lose a part of the world that American leadership, both short-term and long-term, is critical. China, I'm not going to go through I could spend my whole, even Senate 10-minute time just on China. But let me pick on one part of this China competition that's critical to Virginia, but absolutely critical to America. And that is, my job as chairman of the Intelligence Committee is candidly trying to change the definition of national security to say, yes, it is our military and tanks and guns and ships and planes, but more than ever, national security is a technology competition. As my Virginia friends know, my background was in the wireless industry, and it was a hell of a wake-up call. And let me preface by quickly also saying, my beef is with the CCP and Xi Jinping's leadership. It is not with the Chinese people and Chinese diaspora. And when I was governor, I led trade missions to China. I encouraged, as you remember, Bill, relationships between VCU and Fudan University and a host of things. I'm not anti-Chinese by any means. But starting in 2012, when Xi took over China and decided that it was more important for the primacy of the Communist Party than to try to have markets or any kind of freedoms for the Chinese people, we have to make this change. And my wake-up call in many ways is my background when I was in Business Guy was in the wireless industry. And it was like more than a shock when China, not only kind of unbeknownst to me as we kind of were asleep at the switch, started to take my own industry, wireless, and created a company named Huawei that none of us had heard of 15 years ago, didn't really exist, and was suddenly giving away telecom equipment in 5G categories for free to bring nation states. And if you're a telephone equipment and wireless equipment, which all has back doors, and you depend upon a single source of a single supplier, that kind of dependence is enormously problematic. So that technology competition that we've started to see with 5G, there are going to be 2 or 3 domains that I think are terribly important that we have to step up our game. Obviously, everybody says AI. I've been spending a lot of time there. I won't go into that right now, quantum computing. But a couple that we have not, and again, this plays into Virginia's strength. One is, if we are going to power the data centers that Dave Marsden has done such a good job of looking at from the General Assembly, if we are going to power our data centers, if we're going to have a green economy, we have to have nuclear in the mix. And the ability to bring what's called SMR, small modular nuclear, to our country in terms of data center power, in terms of distributed power generation, if we are going to have our allies around the world work with us, and they want to work with us, not China, we've got to be in the game on SMRs. And there is no state in the country that is better prepared, from our nuclear subs and aircraft carriers to our concentration of nuclear in Lynchburg to HII in terms of what they can do in terms of this area than SMRs. And that is a competition area with China. Another that is not on people's radar screen at this point is the competition in bio, both in terms of synthetic biology, the ability to make food in a different way, make drugs in a different way, literally create material science in a whole different way. And China is investing at a 2-to-1 ratio. Back in nuclear, there's been a recent reveal that says China may be 15 years ahead of us. We've got to catch. Our technology can be better. We've got to catch up with. Bio, if you think an industry sector is going to dramatically transform by artificial intelligence, no one will be more transformed by AI than bio, that potential. And we've got to make sure that we maintain that leadership. Again, I'm going way too long, but I got a couple more areas I got to hit. If you've never heard of Huawei 10 years ago, the next company you're going to start to hear about from China that most of you have not heard of, which will be a national and international threat, is BGI, Beijing Genomics Institute. And China is hoovering up data to the point where they collect out of the bathrooms at every international airport, to buying up DNA samples from around the world, from collecting personal data on individuals in China at an exponential level, and not completely different to the who has the most compute, who has the most DNA. In this competition around bio is something that is terribly important. Fourth area that is on people's radar screen, but I think needs to be higher, and that is India. You know, I'm chairman of the India caucus. I am long India. I've been to India many times. You know, and many of the years, I remember going as governor. I was the first governor to lead a trip. Everybody was going to China. I said, I think we ought to go to India as well. And India's always been on the precipice of arriving. Well, somebody who was just in India, India has arrived. Its time is now. And what we have in India are two things that are, I think, remarkably important. One is the fact that if you ask Indian political leadership, and if our press friends weren't here, I'd give you the names of some of that leadership, say, what are your 3 biggest concerns in India going forward, national security-wise? One senior-most leader said, my 3 biggest concerns for India are China, China, China. And that alignment is extraordinarily important. We think as well, I've been disappointed by, frankly, the Indian government's reaction to the Ukraine invasion. But this, some Indian leaders, again, have said to me, this is a age differential. Everybody below 50 in India wants to side with us. Everybody older remembers where we sided on the India-Pakistan war in the 70s. So time is on our side, and as one, again, senior Indian official said to me, You know, Senator, I know you're mad at me about what we're doing on Russia, but he goes, he didn't know a single Indian that wanted to immigrate to Russia or China. What we have in this India relationship that is extraordinary is the Indian diaspora. It is powerful, it is potent, and there are ways we can build off of the Quad and AUKUS in terms of or the Quad. But with India, we ought to take more advantage of that diaspora going both ways. For example, there are 250,000 citizens of Indian heritage that are American citizens that have gone home to India for retirement. Every one of them ought to be part of a kind of a bilateral friendship agreement between our countries. And in all of these technology domains, India will be a leader. India is area number 4. Number 5 is the Middle East. I've already mentioned why, one of the reasons why we have to end the war in Gaza. Beyond getting the hostages back, beyond making sure Israel's security is secured, beyond ending the amount of suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and frankly on the West Bank as well, is there is a sea change going on in the Gulf states' leadership about how they are viewing the world. Saudi, Emiratis, Qatar, for their own reasons, have decided, just as frankly most of the rest of the world have decided, if they have their preference, they'd rather be with us. I think about all the third world nations who were at one point part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. They said, I'm going to get all this free stuff. Well, you got a lot of dissatisfied countries around the world because they got promised infrastructure from China. China imported their own workforce. They didn't do a very good job on the infrastructure, and they ended up being deeply in debt. The Gulf states, who've had plenty of resources, they have all made the decision that they no longer want to be simply petro states and invest abroad. They want to actually transform their home economies. A lot of that transformation will be around artificial intelligence, around data centers, around quantum computing, and the possibility of them fully aligning and stop playing us off against China, us off against Russia, is tremendous. But we've got to make sure that we can bring about that ceasefire in Gaza, so one, we can bring them into the rebuilding of Gaza, but equally important to make sure that we bring those nation states to our side fully. Last issue, and one that is it is extraordinarily important, and it's again only in the last 30 days has it even kind of blipped back in to the national or international news, and that's Sudan. There are more people killed every day in Sudan than in Gaza and Ukraine combined. And we are on the verge of having a famine in Ukraine that will make Darfur, or those of you who remember, all of the musicians and others who came together back in the 80s around Ethiopia, the famine that will take place in Sudan will dwarf those, and it is coming. The good thing about trying for pennies on the dollar, and the interesting thing about Sudan, both of the warring factions are bad guys. We don't have to pick a side. But if we can actually show that America cares about what's happening in Africa, where by about 2035, it will be not only the fastest growing economically, but far and away the fastest growing population-wise. We have lost a lot of influence in the last year and a half in Niger and Burkina Faso and a whole series of countries in West Africa as they've turned to China or turned to the Wagner Group in Russia. If we could actually show that Americans care as much about black Africans dying as we care about people in the rest of the world, what that does for us in terms of how we are viewed across Africa, what that does for us in terms of, and we have an extraordinary Sudanese American diaspora in Virginia, what we can do to say that we will live our values is extraordinarily important. First step is humanitarian aid. First step is, and we have somebody from Virginia that is enormously involved in this. Tom Perriello, the former congressman, is now the administration's Sudan envoy. I'm in on this with personal money. Sorting through who you even try to give your aid to is something I'm still sorting through. But Sudan is something, first, we ought to prevent famine. Second, we need to bring a resolution to the conflict. But this failure to address Sudan will be an issue that could haunt us literally for decades. So that was my quick trip around 6 spots in the world that may not make the news every day into the time, and I'll sit down and join the panel. The rest of the world wants American leadership. We may not be perfect, Lord knows. But when the alternative is the authoritarian regimes of China or Russia or Iran, this, as General Mattis says, from the diplomatic side to the military side, the rest of the world, frankly, wanders without American leadership. So I don't care who your political party or where you are or how you flow left or right. But there is nothing in Americans' self-interest, in America's economic interest, and frankly, in the interest of the overall world prosperity going forward, than maintain strong, principled American leadership across all these domains. Yes, it's been diplomatic. Yes, of course, it's been military, economic. The one area that we've got to still step up our game is on this technology competition. So that was almost 6 minutes. So I'm done. Thank you all very much. I'll go sit down.
Wow. No, right here. That was a tour de force. Ooh, there we go. Okay, gentlemen. I've been doing this can you all hear me? I've been doing this a long time. That was the best 6-minute tour de force of the world I think I have ever heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you for sharing an insight into what's not always on the front page of the news that we all need to worry about. Welcome, General. Welcome, Brett. Let's have a conversation. Senator Warner, I'm going to pick up on the national security theme that you started. You gave us a lot to worry about, and I want to ask you to imagine you're going to stay a senator, I hope, for a long time, because you play such an important role. But for a moment, picture yourself in Foggy Bottom. You're asked to come in, you can be the Secretary of State, or you're asked to brief the Secretary of State, in either party. With the same set of worries, how do we use the toolkit at the Secretary of State level, the development, the diplomacy that you just talked about is so critical to address the range of issues and make sure it's in a bipartisan way, which is your calling card?
Well,
what are the 3-4 things that you would do on day one when the new Secretary of State, whoever it is, Democrat or Republican, comes in and says, Senator Warner, you know more than anything about these intel issues. What do we do to solve this?
And I say to my colleagues here, I'm going to promise to actually go back to my time constraints and not be Senate speak for the balance of my time. You guys, yeah. Quickly, number one, make clear that we're going to live our values. What people respect most about America is the fact that our values of democracy and human rights, and we're aspiring still to have a free and equal society. We've got a ways to go, but at least those are our values. We've got to live our values. Mm-hmm. Second is technology competition is national security. Who wins this competition will depend, yes, on the strength of our military, and our military leadership across the board supports it, but it will also mean who wins the battle for AI, who wins the battle around quantum, who wins the bio battle, who generates these new carbon-free energy sources. So technology competition. And third is, for as frustrating as these international organizations are, and a lot of them need to be reformed, including the UN and elsewhere, I would rather be in the room than outside the room looking in, and the rest of those organizations will look to us if we participate.
I'm going to pick up on that last point. And General, I want to ask you, I was I think Senator Warner probably was too, this summer when the world, and we hosted the celebration of the 75th anniversary of NATO. It was quite really an important and impressive moment. You culminated your impressive military career as the 22nd Deputy Chair of the NATO Military Committee, a great title, but it's a very, very important role that you played in leading then 30-nation alliance. Talk about how you look through the strategic lens of all the problems and challenges that Senator Warner just laid out, of where these alliances play in to address these threats.
Thank you. That's a great question. And sir, thanks for your presentation. Not since the 40s have we had a threat in Asia and a threat in Europe simultaneously. And different than those times, and different than the Cold War days, our economies are absolutely linked. Today, NATO purchased 1.3 billion euros in Chinese goods, and tomorrow, and the next day. So that linkages is going to be how we really work through this going forward. Xi Jinping and Putin have had over 45 meetings. There's never been two leaders in history have that many meetings, ever. And they're not talking about the surf conditions in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, right? They're talking about upending the global order that we established coming out of World War II. And that's it, and putting their blueprint on that absolute global order. The piece at NATO, as we were talking about, is at the same time that's happening, which we don't talk about much, the complete arms control treaties have completely imploded. Mm-hmm. The last time that happened to us in the U.S., we spent 9% of our GDP on the military, on hard power, 9%. We're not even close to that right now going, and we really haven't educated our public going forward on that. And I think the other umbrella frame that you have to look at is the fact that our society is not ready for this pace and full afterburner, using my Air Force lingo, or in full afterburner going into this pace of this new world. So the Alliance just recently, in the 75th, established for the first time in 35 years, and we haven't had to think about national defense at all for 35 years. That means there's not one military leader on active duty, and not one senior leader, predominantly in all the nation states of the Alliance, who actually had to think about national defense. So we have to link now, for the first time in 35 years, a strategy aligned with our threat, aligned with now military force structure that goes to our defensive plans, that then you integrate and defend the Alliance. So that's where we're at right now. And it was great to see in the 75th them kind of put all the puzzle back together that we had in 1988.
Yeah, well, great. I want to link the national security to the economic security, because Senator Warner, you've talked about this whole conversation, and bring Brett, you into this. More and more, every conversation I'm in is about how economic security is national security. We've been hosting a number of people in this space, and the conversation is always, it used to be economic security conversation here, national security conversation here, then they went parallel, now they're one and the same. You know this as well as anybody. I want to talk about some of these opportunities. As president of the Virginia Manufacturers Association, you helped create a landmark report, and I want to get the title of it right, A New Blueprint Making the American South Manufacturing Sector More Competitive by 2030. And I loved what one of the key recommendations was, help Southern companies open doors to new global customers. So this picks up just of what Senator Warner has been saying. Talk about for a minute about how connecting with Senator Warner's conversation that we got to play, and we got to play big. How important is the global economy to manufacturing here? And where does the U.S. government play? State Department, Stephanie kicked it off right at the beginning, not just the local, not just the state government, but the federal government.
Great, thanks, Liz. That report, we're really proud of that work. That was with the former Southern Governors Association.
I love that.
And Governor Beebe was chair, and I'll never forget this. I asked him, what do you really want out of this report when we finish it? He said, boy, I just want to put some swagger back in the South. So, since then, we've had a long road. Our foundation has continued the work of that former SGA report, and we're now measuring in 5 areas of competitiveness, 54 different metrics. And trade is one of those very important metrics. Manufacturers absolutely understand that defense plus diplomacy plus trade equals peace and prosperity. That formula hasn't changed in a while. But Virginia is unique because we are the nation's defender. We are the military of the United States, and we're proud of that history. Everything from our Navy to our nuclear capabilities, all that is derived from our manufacturing base in the Commonwealth. And so when we look at that, How do you create stability in the world through trade agreements, through diplomacy? It starts with products. And when you look at Virginia manufacturers, we're only 2% of all the businesses, but we're 60% of the state's entire export base.
That's incredible.
So these are companies that are dominating in their fields. But believe it or not, we still see huge opportunities in the American South in particular to continue to grow that. And as we grow more export opportunities and we help entrepreneurs build more relationships in countries, that's when we're going to see more stability in those relationships. And I'll give you one example. My son, he's 26, spent a summer working in Colombia. When I was a kid, Colombia was a place that you feared.
Yeah.
He had no fear. He's leaving Friday to spend 2 weeks on vacation in El Salvador. When I was a kid, again, you could not go to El Salvador. And that all happens through trade.
These are all trading partners, right?
Absolutely.
Senator Warner, when I was in Africa last, I arranged for a CODEL, bipartisan CODEL, bicameral, with AFRICOM. And everybody was ready to hear what China was doing. They were hearing what Russia was doing military. What surprised them is when they heard what Russia was doing economically throughout the continent. You have a piece of legislation with Senator Rubio that's quite interesting to ensure that we're engaged with critical minerals. And some of the solutions in your legislation are to enhance diplomacy, to invest in the Ex-Import Bank, to invest in the Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, which I'm on the board of. These are some of the tools that we're talking about today within the international affairs budget. Talk about how you see this importance of the global economy, why it matters to the global the Virginia economy, and why this legislation is kind of a piece of the puzzle here between if we want to play, we got to show up with these right toolkits in terms of critical minerals is just one example of many.
And there are many. I mean, I think about, and I appreciate the things that Brett just said. It just, I would argue we have done some things that at the federal level, some bipartisan, some not, that help push this. I think the CHIPS bill, we would have never built another fab in America ever in terms of a chip manufacturing facility without the CHIPS bill. Now we got to execute it the right way. For all of the issues around transition to a greener economy, the IRA has already generated $1 trillion of investment.
That's amazing.
Now, and again, that's kind of public-private. It's not, again, nothing comes from Congress that's perfect. Let me be the first to acknowledge that. But a lot of that manufacturing is actually happening in the South in terms of battery facilities and other plants. But on the question, let me start a little bit for a brief second on rare earth minerals. You're not going to make lithium-ion batteries without rare earth minerals.
Right.
You're not going to do all of the things that are involved in energy transition without access to rare earth minerals. One of the reasons I mentioned Oceana, that's on nobody's part, that is open territory at this point, that for pennies on the dollar, we can get those countries aligned with us that we can have some of the access. But challenge is not only the question around access to the minerals, like cobalt in the DRC, and China and Russia. Russia is less economic. Russia is more kind of coming in with Wagner and kind of old-fashioned, we're going to prop up the regime in Africa with their mercenaries. Yeah. China comes in with what appears to be these Belt and Road initiatives, and there is an opening now because many of the African nations are saying, we didn't get what we were promised. We didn't get the work. The infrastructure's kind of crummy, and we're deeply in debt.
They want us.
And they want us. So whether we do that with our partners, whether we also, and the minerals is only a piece of this, the processing is where the real magic takes place. And if you go by mineral, and we're moving some of this, where I'm going to go to a ribbon cutting tomorrow in South Boston, where I think it's titanium, where there's a very interesting company that we, working with the governor, we were able to be successful on. We got to do more in that space.
That's great.
And that means, and one of the things, let me just quickly, I never do quickly, as you can see, gentlemen, but if we're going to do all this stuff,
always interesting.
if we have to do all this stuff, and this is more a reflection as I look at my Democratic friends in the audience, we got to build stuff in America again. And you can't continue to say we're going to add an extra 2 to 3 years because of our regulatory process to get something built when we're competing with other nation states. And if countries like Canada and Australia can go ahead and get all their approvals on manufacturing projects of national significance in a year or less, we ought to be able to do the same in this country as well.
General, that is worth an applause. I agree. General, I started this morning at the National Defense University. I was talking to a bunch of 3 stars that are primed to be 4 stars along the day. I told you I followed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that was intimidating. We had the same conversation about the link between national security and economic security. You've been all over the world in different theaters. When you were out there, you're doing the kinetic part of the work. How much did you see this conversation about if we don't get the economic security, we're just going to have needing more of your service?
Like General Mattis's quote. Absolutely, the linkages, the secret sauce of the United States is our linkages of hard and soft power, right? How we do all of that hard and soft power is truly our secret sauce. China and Russia have no friends. They're only coerced friends. We have 31 allies in Europe and partners all over the globe. So thinking about how you then we have to do 2.5 things well now. Deter and defend in Asia, 1. Deter and defend in Europe, 2. And still be able to do a 0.5 defeat what I call wacko powers. North Korea, Iran, perhaps Venezuela, something of a wacko power. We cannot do that alone. So we have to have a PhD level of understanding of all those nations are good at something that are our allies and partners. So let's integrate all that and integrate and do it across the diplomacy, across economic, across hard power military, and do it at the PhD level. That's what U.S. national leadership has to absolutely do. On the economic side of things, I had this discussion with Secretary General just before I left. Today, 88% of all global transactions were in the U.S. dollar. When I was a baby, they were 88%. So the global order that my grandfather fought in Europe and my other grandfather fought in the Pacific helped establish is still completely intact. 60% of all foreign currencies in the dollar, 20% in the euro, so 80% of our allied currency is the currency of the planet. And then 64% of NATO foreign direct investment is with us, and we have 64% with them. So we're laying golden eggs for each other. That is the foundation of why we have hard power. If we upend that economic piece and that soft power piece, then the hard power will not be able to act alone. And can I just do one quick story on soft power? Because when you say soft power, everybody understands a carrier, big deck carrier coming from Virginia. Everybody understands a fighter squadron coming from North Carolina or Virginia. But the soft power piece, when I was in Pakistan after we killed bin Laden, I was there for a year. We had the Arab Spring then happen. Every meeting that I went into with my Pakistani admirals and general counterparts, the Chinese admiral and the Russian general were either in or out spying on us, overtly, covertly spying on us all. And so when the Arab Spring happened and things went really pear-shaped in Pakistan for a while, they didn't call the Chinese admiral or the Russian general, they called me, because they knew I was going to give them my best professional advice. It wasn't tainted by the president, and I don't mean tainted in a bad word. It wasn't tainted by the president. My boss at the time, General Mattis, it wasn't tainted by his opinion. I mean this respectfully. It wasn't tainted by Congress. All of those things. I was there we had developed a trust relationship, and I was going to give them my best professional advice on how to move forward, and they trusted me, and that's soft power. Now take that exponentially across the planet and all of our embassies. Boy, I wish we had some embassies in some of the places you were saying, sir, because it's just absolutely important. And if we pull out any time, if you look at our history, any time we have pulled back and started to pull out of the area, whether that's Pakistan, Afghanistan, 1989, you name it, things went very poorly for the United States. So our engagement is absolutely crucial.
Thank you. I'm going to do one quick question to Senator Warner and Brett, and we'll try to take maybe a couple questions before the senator has to leave. This is a state that just has this rich tapestry of diaspora communities, and it fuels the economy, it fuels exports, it adds to the culture. It's just a wonderful part of what all of us love about Virginia. 1 in 8 Virginians are born abroad, and I love the statistic that 1 of 6 workers are from abroad. Senator, talk about how this tapping into the wealth of this knowledge and this culture makes a difference for the economy, and what it means, Brett, from the manufacturing community. Quick answers so we can get a couple.
Quick answer is, I would add one of the other secret sauces of our country is that we're the only country in the world that you can come here, first generation, take that oath, and you're American. I got the opportunity to take my family to Paris for the Olympics. I could move to France tomorrow. I'm never going to be French. In that secret sauce, as kind of hackneyed as we say the American dream, is alive and well, and we shouldn't lose it. And while, of course, we need to make our border secure, we should also make sure that the intellectual capital that desperately wants to come to this country, that we still train at a Virginia Tech. And graduate students don't then leave and move to UK or Canada because they've got a rational immigration policy for particularly high-skilled.
Love it. Do you want to add anything, Brett?
Yeah, I would say that you can actually trace back the access to just absolutely world-class talent to our proliferation of trade agreements. Half of all manufactured goods exported go to our top 20 trading partners that we have foreign trade agreements with. This is Singapore, South Korea, and all of Israel, all these great countries. And so we have this relationship that is not only economic, but it's also that intellectual capital where we're able to keep them. I totally agree with the senator. There have been several governors who've said, if we're going to give degrees to folks that may have a citizenship somewhere else, perhaps they need a green card when they graduate as well.
Wonderful.
And we keep them.
All right.
And do you know
we take
what
two, three?
you wouldn't, let me just,
Yeah.
here's your quiz question. I wonder if anybody's going to get it right. We've got extraordinarily successful diasporas across Virginia. What is the highest earning diaspora in Virginia?
Okay, who wants to guess? India, I heard. What else? Mexico, Asian? Africa. Anybody get it right yet?
Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Best
Okay.
educated, highest income.
We all learned. All right, raise your hand. We'll try to get a couple. We'll take 2 or 3, and we'll see how we do. Yes, Emily. No speeches. We want to get as many as we can. Quick. Hi, Clint.
Senator Warner, as you know, we're facing global security crises around the world. And as part of the Agribusiness Council, it's important for me to bring the attention back to us. How do you connect food security with national security? And where do you feel that plugs into our efforts here in the United States?
I heard that a lot with when I was with
Oh,
Joni Ernst
Say
in
the last sentence. Where does that connect to the
Virginia.
How do we bring that back to Virginia?
Okay, Virginia,
Yeah.
great.
Let's take one more. Yeah, I was with Joni Ernst in Iowa, and we talked
Let's
about
get a
about
couple,
this.
then we'll
Yep, let's
get a
take
couple
more,
questions, then we'll try to do them quick.
and then we'll do one round. Emily, right here in the front row, or whoever. Raise your hand.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this insightful conversation and insights. Michelle Maldonado, I'm a member of the House of Delegates here in Virginia. I wanted to first say thank you for spotlighting what's happening in the African continent, because there are 2 things I think we have to be aware of. Not just the mining, as we have this push for
Quick question.
electric vehicles. Yeah, I'm just wondering, how are we, you mentioned that we have to focus on Africa, so we're looking at Chinese and Russian influence. They are not only taking economic opportunities, but building educational systems, building universities. So I think there's an economic and an environmental and an educational component. I'm wondering, as you look at that, how are we going to position ourselves so we don't lose an opportunity across the richness of that continent?
Great. Let's try one more.
This is primarily from the general. You've served overseas in all kinds of places with increasing populations, in a fragile world, pandemics, extremism. Is the military working better now with our civilian agencies to really do what we need to do? I also served, and there's a lot of room for improvement. We go back to General Mattis's. That's mine.
So quick answer on CivMill. How's it working?
It's actually, all my experiences were very, very positive. The mill-to-mill engagements with the nations that we're at, to build that soft power, letting the ambassadors lead from the front, and then supporting them with all the military's pieces and parts that are part of each nation state that we're in. When the U.S. government parked me at the edge of the empire, right? If you look at my military career, it was all 10 to combat deployments and all deploy at the edge of the empire. That piece out there works very, very well. It has to be resourced from Washington, but that piece and the
When you get out
engagement and
there.
the relationships,
Are great.
very solid.
Senator,
Quickly,
Africa?
well, let me,
Food security.
I agree with the general mill to mill. I think mill to the IC, the intel community, which again is about 80% located in Virginia, it's better cooperative than ever. An area we still have to do better on, I think, on both DoD and on the IC side, is getting innovative technology into these services quicker. We got a lot of that in Virginia. That is still too slow. In-Q-Tel on the early stage investment side, on the IC side, DIU on the DoD side, we're recognizing that cooperation. On food, the conflict in Venezuela is going to be driven, if we get 4 million people showing up at our border, as much because Venezuelans are starving under Maduro. No reason for, but food security. What's going to kill people in Sudan is killing people today, and it's going to exponentially ramp up, is food insecurity. Wonderful opportunities for Virginia agribusiness, particularly in Africa, I think, but also where I would love us to go is if we can bring the power of artificial intelligence to agriculture, in terms of how we grow food, synthetic biology, how we grow our materials, it is a huge, wide opportunity, and American business, American agriculture, and Virginia agriculture should take the lead on that. Again, not to be shouting out tech again, but a lot of tech. Back on Africa, I think you are right that the power of Russia and China to bring educational institutions to Africa is something we have to counter, and it is pennies
On the dollar here.
pennies on the dollar.
It sure is. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to do something really hard. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer a very tough question that's on the screen.
Liz, you're looking at Brett? I see you're
No,
not
I'm
looking
looking at the screen first, but I'm going to go right down the line. What's it worth? So, as I said, I ask this question everywhere I go, of asking you to think, what's it worth to Virginia for America to be engaged in the world and to invest in development and diplomacy? Hard, 30 seconds. Brett, what's it worth?
This is a short answer as I can get, is I think for the very first time after COVID, Americans learned the word supply chain because the first time in their life they saw empty shelves.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
The global supply chain became relevant, and why it matters depends on stability.
Fabulous. You did it. You nailed it. General.
Try
Yes,
that.
that was great. Remember that. All right, General. Pressure's on.
The global order coming out of World War II that we established made the world wealthy and safe. And if you think all it's done for humanity has been marvelous. And our leadership is absolutely critical to that. There's no friends of Russia and China. U.S. leadership has to continue to plug away at hard, soft, our secret sauces. I agree with you, sir. Everywhere I go in the world, all these engagements I do, everybody speaks English. Everyone. No one speaks Mandarin, and no one's going to speak Mandarin for centuries. And everyone wants to immigrate here.
Amazing.
Those are pretty good answers, both of them. How about this directly? To quote Austin Powers, $1 billion. No, quickly, we got the port, we got Dulles, we have as rich a diaspora populations that are, again, as secret sauce as any state in the country. We are the home of our military in so many areas. There is no place that is better positioned, and you add in our world-class educational institutions and the innovation that we've got across a diverse economy, nobody would benefit more.
Now, nobody can close this amazing conversation better than my colleague, Devonte Wilson, who gets the last 2 minutes. He's the new Northeast outreach manager. He's the one who put all this together, and he gets to thank them and close.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Liz. I would like to thank Senator Warner for his continued leadership on Capitol Hill, and for all of our wonderful featured speakers for sharing their thoughtful insights on today. Thank you so much.
Yay.
We also want to give a special thank you to Coca-Cola for serving as our South Initiative Chair, and to our local partners who made today possible. I want to encourage each of you to check out the impactful work they do here in Virginia, as well as all around the world. Lastly, thank you to our members of our Virginia Advisory Committee members. I see many of you out there, and veterans for Smart Power Network, and all of you for joining us here in person and virtually. If you're new to the USGLC network and mission, please make sure to opt in for updates from our coalition. My colleagues and I, we will be floating not only around this room, but around the expo right next door at the reception if you have any questions. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to Virginia is critical. You are part of an important group of people around the world, around the country, and you have the ability to make a strong impact. Share what you have learned today with your networks, your friends, your families. Don't let today's conversation be the last one you have about America's role in global leadership. Thank you for your support, your passion, and your voice. Because of people like you, sure. Because of people like you all across the country, America remains the leading force of good all around the world. So on that note, it's all good. So listen, so on that note, if you're here with us in person, I would love to invite you right next door. We have a wonderful expo of some wonderful Virginia partners, as well as a reception, and we look forward to seeing you over there. Thank you so much.